well on your way. We are well on our way to transforming this world, which we love so much, but we often serve so poorly. And then this is my critique of Western language, some Western language. Thomas Hobbes was this scholar in the 17th century. He's kind of like the father of modernity. And talking about words, this is how he understood the importance of words. The light of humane minds is perspicuous words, but by exact definitions, first snuffed and purged from ambiguity. So you have to be very precise. Reason is the pace. Reason is the one that keeps this going. An increase of science is the way. And the benefit of mankind, he didn't include others there, I'm sorry for that. The end. And on the contrary, he says, metaphors and senseless and ambiguous words are like igneous fatui, in other words, elusive fire. And reasoning upon them is wandering amongst innumerable absurdities, and they end contention and sedition or contempt. So when you start being imprecise in your language, then Hobbes said, you're not going to contribute to society. You have to be very precise. What is the meaning of social capital in contrast to cultural capital? This is social capital, that is cultural capital. It's kind of like they don't mix. Or you have to find a relation, right? And I put him up here because this kind of understanding of language and this kind of understanding about the nature of reality that says we have to be scientifically precise, I think is part of what I call epistemic violence. It's a violence that is exerted in our ways of thinking and knowing, and it shapes the world to turn it into something that is like a machine. And I think you know, and I know, that we are human beings and not machines. So that's all background for some of the things now that I have methodological assumptions. I think I'll skip through these. But I understand that we will talk about this more because it is tied to social capital. And so I would like to share with you first this notion of habitus from Ruiz, who is a social thinker. And essentially, this will all make sense later, I hope. Essentially, the habitus, it has to do with the structures of society and the subjective role of agents within it. So let me just use this as an example, the classroom. This is a habitus. The way that this is organized is the structure. But a habitus is more than just this structure, because you are here and you have the choice. You can make the choice of saying, let's not meet in this classroom, or let's turn this around. Lester, why don't you sit down there and let the students up here, and then let's talk a little bit about what the world is about. So habitus, whenever you think about habitus, and we think about social capital later, habitus is a key thing to think about. What is the place in which you find yourself? But it's not just about structure, and it's not just about individuals. It is a combination of both. And sometimes it conflicts, and sometimes it does not conflict. It's a very interesting reality. When I taught in Japan in the 1970s, Japanese students are very proper. They will call you professor, etc. So one time, following this movie that I love so much, I asked the students to get up from the chair and stand on the table. Oh, it's rude. We don't do that. I said, no, why don't you just, all the students go stand up on your desk. So they did, and I walked around without standing on the desk, and I said, does this change what happens when you are standing up there and you're looking down? You're looking down at the professor instead of looking up at the professor because I'm standing there. I said, yeah, there's a change. It's a bit different, isn't it? I said, yep. So you have the capacity in this notion of habitus to kind of like shape it. Social capital is going to be like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So habitus is one concept that will be there. Relationality, very simple, simply, we are all related to each other. We are not like billiard balls, externally related. When we look at each other, we communicate some kinds of meaning. Some of them we understand, some of them we don't. That's a methodological assumption that I have. And then the other piece that I wanted for us to think about has to do with the notion of intersectionality. And intersectionality is simply, if you look at reality as very complex, so often we are taught, if this is, can you see? So let's say this is the nature of reality. Then we are asked to focus on this, right? But actually reality is a little bit different. It also has something like this where there are meeting points here. So the methodological notion of intersectionality, which actually was developed by feminist, womanist thinkers, talk about when we try to understand reality, we need to look at the intersection. The intersection, rather not only the large pieces, but how are they connected? So that's why I used the example of Ruiz. If you want to understand Lester, who is in diaspora, you cannot just understand him while he already went to the United States. That's only part of me. What's the intersection between my being in the United States and being a Filipino born in the Philippines? Part of that intersection is I eat rice, I eat bread. It's intersectional. Some of my friends say, oh, Lester, you know, I like to wear nice colored clothes. You know, pink, I like pink. I said, no, you don't wear, Lester, don't wear pink. Pink's for girls. Blue is for boys. Right? I wanted to wear a pink shirt today, but I wasn't able to iron it. So what does intersectionality there is? The intersection of maleness, being a man, and pink. So in order to understand Lester, or society if you want to, you don't only look at the pink shirt and the male Lester, you look at the way Lester used the pink shirt. Very simple, right? That's the notion of intersectionality that will be part of this conversation. Hybridity is that not necessarily intersection, but it's kind of like the meeting place of different kinds of reality. Hybrid, somebody help me with an example of hybrid. Hybrid is a mix, right? Anyone?
Yeah, Paulus gave us a very good example of this.
Yes?
So that's jumping to my mind.
Okay. So I wasn't there, so please remind me, what was that about? What was the example?
Well, if you are of Chinese descent and you are born in the city in Middle Java and you have a grandmother who is Dutch, then what sort of culture should you cultivate? Where do you belong? In the whole debate about contextuality, what is the context? That's hybridity.
Yes, that's this method of this in-between space, the intersections of different kinds of cultures, so they're related. And I think we live in a world where we, I'm just noticing as an outsider in Indonesia, there's so many hybrid realities. So it's rich and it's full. And hybridity, I think, is in fact a notion that it has the real possibility of transformation. So let's also put that in the back of our heads as we think more about social capital. Then the other one is the notion of contextuality, already mentioned. I have kind of like 5 elements to contextuality, which I think are important. One is that it's always an interpretive act. When we take a context, we're always interpreting. And it's interpreting is not just mere thinking, it's actually living out what it is that you are in relation to another. So that's one dimension of contextuality. Sorry. The second is that it is contextuality is always tied to, most of the time it's tied to transformation. By transformation I mean the creation of fundamentally new that is also fundamentally better. So it is a dynamic. Contextuality is not something that you take and then you fix. Contextuality is a process. That's the second element. The third element is that it is contextuality is always, in my view, an act or an event of competence. That is to say, it has structure, it has process, and it has human agency. That is the human being acting. So when we take a look at the social capital, the discourse on social capital is huge now. It's growing. It would be important to take a look at what are the structures and the processes and the involvement of human beings in that creation of social capital. And that would be taking that in, taking the context quite seriously. And then the other piece, the fourth piece, is that contextuality is always about position. I already mentioned that it changes if you're high up or you're low. If you're used to lying down and you get up, then the word changes. It's a matter of position. So, and this is positionality is a critique that says that we are determined by our particular context only. Positionality means that you can it is actually moving. You can shift. We'll talk about that a little more. And then finally, contextuality for me is already about the global. Often we think about contextualization or contextuality as making either the global local or the local global. But my argument is, and this is not unique to me, there are many who argue that actually the global is in fact also local. So the cell phone, right? The cell phone is in fact this iPhone is sold by Apple. It's assembled usually it's assembled in China, and China sends the best of their products to the U.S. and then sells the less. And they have quality control in China, so they don't buy iPhones in China because that you are getting an inferior product. I can tell you that, right? But the encounter with the global notion of iPhone, this is global already, but it is in my hand. So global is not, contextuality is not making something that is local, as I said already, something that is global or vice versa. It is already global. And that has consequences for how we deal with human action, for example, in different contexts, when we do not think only of globalization as something that is quote-unquote up there. Okay. You've already talked, we've talked a lot about, here you talked a lot about violence, but so I started a preliminary list. Some of this you're familiar with, some of this overlap. You will have this as your list, but some of these things are violence, for example. I make a distinction between the dynamics of violence, which is how violence happens, and the forms of violence. So there are, and of course they're related. So in forms of violence, we've talked about it already, there's epistemic violence, there is also religious violence, spiritual, physical, this is basically review. But in the dynamics of violence, there are many kinds of dynamics that are involved. So for example, being dispersed, displaced, and dislocated as a human being is a form of violence. Racialization, the isms that were talked about here plus power. One is racialization is, I think, is a limiting understanding that says that you are who you are based on your quote-unquote your race or your ethnicity. In the U.S., and this has actually classification consequences. So in the U.S., when I sign my documents, when I register for the census, for example, I am not Asian. I am actually Latin, not white.
Latin, not white.
Latin, not white. Right? So I always confuse what is, who am I when I'm trying to fill out who are you? Are you, Anglo? Are you all of that, right? So what is this, Or in the LGBTQ community, so male, female, there's no other place, right? So there's a certain kind of it's racialized. It's also gendered. Gender is gendered realities. Sexualized, a little bit different. Sexualized is, so for example, in terms of human trafficking, prostitution, right? Those are forms of surveillance is another form of violence. You can discuss some of the complexities of this, but I'm just sort of raising some of these. In the capitalist society, you have issues like commodification. You should turn human beings into commodities. Domestic, quote-unquote, domestic helpers.
Yes.
We know domestic helpers are commodities exchanged on the market. So commodification is in my view, a form of violence. And there are other less obvious ones, like pathologizing reality. So, for example, there was an event in the U.S. whenever there is a violent crime that is committed, like shooting and all of that. Often the press will say, "Oh, he was sick. He has psychological problems." So that's pathologizing the nature of the violence, right? When maybe that person was not sick. But the classification immediately is you're pathologizing. So pathologizing is a form of, or criminalizing something, or an action. Actions that may not necessarily be quote-unquote, but are criminal only in relation to, for example, the state system,